I walked into the lawyer's office thinking I was finally going to have a place to call my own, but instead, I found out that my own parents and siblings had already sold my inheritance right out from under me, leaving me with nothing but a set of keys to a house they no longer owned. Can you even imagine the level of betrayal it takes for your own flesh and blood to forge signatures and liquidate your future behind your back, just because they thought they deserved the money more than you deserved a home? I'm sitting here now, watching the dust settle on a legal battle that has torn my family into shreds, and I honestly need to know if I'm the villain here for triggering a backup plan my grandfather left me that effectively ruined all of their lives. Was I wrong for following my grandfather's final, secret instructions, or did they get exactly what was coming to them for trying to steal my life? To understand how we got to this point, you have to understand my relationship with my Grandpa Joe. He was a gruff, old-school carpenter who didn't say much, but he showed his love through the things he built. While my parents and my two older brothers, Mark and Steve, were always chasing the next big payday or complaining about their corporate jobs, I was the one spending my weekends in Grandpa's workshop. I was the disappointment of the family because I chose to go into social work instead of finance or law. My parents constantly reminded me that I'd never be wealthy, while Mark and Steve flaunted their leased luxury cars and expensive watches. Grandpa saw right through them. He knew they were shallow and greedy, and he often told me that character is built with your hands, not your wallet. He lived in this beautiful, sprawling Victorian house on the edge of town, a house he had painstakingly restored over 40 years. It was his pride and joy, and it was where I felt most at home. When Grandpa's health started to fail last year, I was the only one who moved in to take care of him. Mark and Steve only visited when they wanted to borrow money for a sure-fire investment, and my parents only called to check if he'd updated his will. It was sickening to watch them hover like vultures. On his final day, Grandpa pulled me close and handed me a small, rusted iron key and a sealed envelope. He told me, "Leo, they're going to try and take what's yours. They don't respect the work, they only respect the gold. This house is yours, but if they find a way to take the roof from over your head, you open this envelope. There's a loose floorboard under the workbench in the cellar. Don't let them win, kid." I thought he was just being paranoid or perhaps a bit confused in his final moments, so I tucked the envelope away and focused on saying goodbye. After the funeral, the will was read, and just as we expected, Grandpa left the house and the surrounding 5 acres specifically to me. My parents were furious. They got a decent inheritance in terms of cash and stocks, but they wanted the real estate. They argued that since I was just a social worker, I couldn't afford the taxes or the upkeep, and that the house should be sold so the family could split the profits fairly. I told them no. It wasn't about the money. It was about the memories and the promise I made to Grandpa to keep the place in the family. For 6 months, I lived there peacefully, or so I thought. I had to go away for a 3-week training seminar for work in another state. When I returned, I pulled into the driveway only to find a massive "sold" sign on the front lawn and a moving crew clearing out the furniture. I was hysterical. I ran inside, screaming at the movers to stop, but they showed me a signed sales contract. My father had used a power of attorney that he had illegally altered, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my affairs, to sell the house to a local developer who planned to tear it down and build a strip mall. They had sold Grandpa's life's work for $2 million and already distributed the funds among themselves. My mother actually had the nerve to tell me to my face that they did it for my own good, because now I wouldn't have the burden of a big house. They didn't even give me a cent of the sale price. They claimed they were holding it in a trust, for me, that I wouldn't be able to touch for 10 years. I was homeless, heartbroken, and completely betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me most. I spent that first night in a cheap motel, clutching the envelope Grandpa had given me. I remembered his words about the cellar. The developers weren't scheduled to start demolition for another week, so I snuck back onto the property under the cover of darkness. I felt like a criminal in my own home. I made my way down to the cellar, found the workbench, and pried up the loose floorboard. Underneath wasn't a stash of cash or a hidden gold bar. It was a secondary, in case of emergency, deed and a series of notarized affidavits. It turns out Grandpa Joe knew exactly what my father was capable of. He had set up a life estate and a very specific clawback clause tied to the historical preservation of the property. But more importantly, there was a second envelope addressed to a specific private investigator and a lawyer Grandpa had on retainer for years. So, that's the situation I was in. My family had forged my name, sold my home, and were already planning vacations with the money while I was sleeping in a motel. I had the power to not only stop the sale, but to trigger a legal nuclear option. That would force the return of the funds and likely result in criminal charges for my father and brothers. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened when I flipped the switch on Grandpa's backup plan, I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done? Would you have protected your family despite their betrayal? Or would you have burned it all down to honor your grandfather's wishes? I didn't hesitate. I went straight to Grandpa's lawyer the next morning. It turned out the backup plan was a masterpiece of legal engineering. Grandpa had recorded a video of himself, fully lucid, explaining that he knew his son, my father, would try to steal the house. He explicitly stated that any attempt to sell the house without my written, notarized consent would trigger an immediate transfer of all his remaining liquid assets, the money my parents and brothers had already received, into a charitable trust for an organization they hated. Furthermore, the affidavits I found proved that the power of attorney my father used was a forgery because the original had been revoked and filed with the county months before Grandpa died. The lawyer and I moved fast. We filed an emergency injunction to stop the demolition. When the developers found out the title was clouded and that they had been sold a property by people who didn't legally own it, they went ballistic. They sued my parents and brothers for fraud and breach of contract. But I didn't stop there. I triggered the clawback clause. Because they had attempted to liquidate the estate against the express wishes of the deceased, the no contest clause in the will kicked in. They were officially disinherited. Every penny of the inheritance they had already started spending was now legally owed back to the estate. My father had already put a down payment on a beach house, and Mark had bought a brand new Porsche. They were forced to sell everything at a loss to try and pay back the money they had stolen. The confrontation was explosive. My mother came to my motel room, crying and screaming that I was destroying the family, and that Grandpa would be ashamed of me. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that Grandpa was the one who gave me the matches to light this fire. My brothers tried to intimidate me, saying they'd make sure I never saw a dime of the family money again. But they didn't realize there was no family money left. It was all gone, swallowed up by legal fees and the charitable trust. The developer eventually backed out of the deal entirely, and because of the fraud, the house was returned to my sole possession. However, because of the legal mess my family created, the house was now designated as a historical landmark, meaning it can never be torn down, exactly like Grandpa wanted. The aftermath was brutal. My parents had to sell their own home to cover the legal settlements, and the returned inheritance funds. They are now living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, and they don't speak to me. Mark and Steve are both facing potential charges for their roles in the forgery and their lying. Lifestyles have completely collapsed. I'm back in the Victorian house now. It's quiet, too quiet, sometimes, but every time I walk over that loose floorboard in the cellar, I feel a sense of peace. I kept my promise. I protected the home he built. My family thinks I'm a monster for choosing a pile of bricks and wood over them, but the way I see it, they chose a pile of cash over me a long time ago. They didn't just sell a house, they sold their relationship with me, and you can't buy that back once it's gone. At the end of the day, I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about respect and integrity. My grandfather knew that sometimes you have to build a cage to catch the wolves, even if those wolves are your own kin. I don't regret a single thing I did, because I know I'm the only one who actually valued what he left behind. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by triggering the backup plan and holding my family accountable. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and getting justice, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or did the punishment fit the crime? I'll see you all in the next story.